And welcome back to the second half of this very interesting conversation we've been having this morning with a panel of three, and we're discussing the gang study that's set to take place in Belize. I have a question in respect of an understanding of the landscape, so to speak. When you look at Belize City, for instance, and you look at the fact that if you canvass Belize City, it's run by specific groups, or gangs as we call them, and it's no longer a situation where if we were emulating the Crips and the Bloods, as in the past, in the early 90s and what have you, now it's certain neighborhoods.
It's turf.
It's turf, and they have influence over other neighborhoods. So in terms of going into these specific areas to conduct your study, how do you gain an understanding of what influence certain groups have over another in perhaps a different area of Belize City?
Well, I think there's two elements to the data collection processes. One is very importantly going to ask the community, the public, the youth, and we're doing that through a couple of methodologies. So we're actually doing a house-to-house survey.
Okay.
So we have 400 households, the vast majority on the south side, a few on the north side as well, and that's a completely random sample. Go to households, complete a short survey. Then we have the focus groups that we've spoken about already, and then we have the online survey that anybody can access and complete. And so that's good to get the wider public engaged, which is very important. But then in terms of how one area influences another, we really need the type of professionals at CYDP who work with those people who exert the influence. And I think the focus groups with the key personnel at CYDP, at Restore, at the police department, at Gateway, at youth services, all of those people who work with this critical population on a daily basis know a lot of that information. And so now it's just to comprehensively put it in one place and use it to design a program.
Let's get your take on that, John.
For the sake of our credibility, I'm just going to say that you'll find out that majority of these particular groups, they would team up for the economic purposes. Some are for protection, based on what can be provided. It is no longer a Crip and Blood issue. That's out the window. Unlike Pittsburgh, we don't have too much of different, type of gangs, just gangs, groups.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the business, it's for the sake of business. I mean, you'll find out who has influence over who, etc. And you'll know this by speaking to them. As a police officer, that might be a red flag for me when we go into these neighborhoods. But unfortunately, we have developed a rapport over the years that the police aspect no longer exists when we go. It's just me and you having this one-on-one. And that's a good thing. It makes us, it gives us the opportunity to spread our wings, to help with the recruitment. When I said recruitment, is that there is no negotiating with the younger generation because they don't even understand what we're doing. But to provide them with the opportunity to get back into that classroom, that's our recruitment. That's what I refer, when I was talking about recruitment, that's what I was referring to.
And I would add, to your point, gangs have changed all over.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? There are still some that are, based in, whether that's Blood or Crips or, particular groups, but a lot of times it is about making money and about surviving and being able to feed your family. It's a different way of saying that. But what I would there's probably maybe three things, and you guys may want to take this a different way, but there's three things that I would that I want for this survey, and I want for you all, right? One thing that I want is this idea of working together, and this is the hard. So getting the data, doing the interviews, all that stuff is probably the easy part, right? It's the easy part because you guys have said in the past you've done other types of analysis on the problem. So that might be the easy part. However, I do think there are some different elements that we've talked about and that we've highlighted. but what I really want is this idea of working together. What I want to say is because money and funds are very scarce for everyone, right? I don't know any place anywhere that just has money overflowing and just, let's just give it out to anyone. And so you have to be strategic now when you're investing your funds. And if the people who are just on this flyer alone can really share their resources and really come up with, a tactic in regards to based off that continuum that I talked about early of how to really, you are really good at this, right? We're going to use you to do the mental health piece that is really needed. And now we're going to target you towards this population specifically because we believe that if we actually, the research says, that if you work with this particular group, you can have more of an impact as opposed to trying to spread yourself across the whole continuum and your money, your impact is like water, right? Like just flowing through the cracks, right? So now this idea of being strategically targeting and also finding out what people are really good at, like your niche is this. And we're going to put you here. So that's one thing, really working together, strategically using your dollars to really get the most bang out of your buck. That's one thing I would wish. The other thing that I would wish is, and this is the harder part, right? So you guys have these ministries, no matter what it is, everybody has something like that. How do you really say, here's what we've learned from this piece, and here's what we need from you? So Jeremy talks about the teachers. He says this over and over, and their lack of not necessarily understanding or appreciating what's happening, or how to address. So there may be an agency or a group, whether it's police, whatever, who can really, during the beginning of the year when teachers come back, can train teachers on, it's just going to be the beginning of the needle, right? But at least you can talk about training teachers, talking to them, trying to build that empathy for who's in front of them. And then if there's a group of kids who they need to target in some way, again, going back to that strategy, right? Then the teachers know or the school knows, here's the group that we're going to refer to specifically.
Service,
right, specifically, right? And not just anybody, because anybody might not be good. Right? Anybody may not have the gifting. Anybody may not, but you know who has the gifting in this area? This particular group right here. So we may save another 20 young people because now we're getting, so now those numbers of 10, 20, 30, 40 start to add up. And we start really are able to turn the needle and then go back to that benchmarking that I talked about early, be able to see that there is actually some type of impact. So my wish is like that again, working together. My theme is working together over and over again because that is the power.
Maximizing the resources.
Yeah, that's why it's comprehensive. Comprehensive says not one group can do it. Comprehensive says not the police or the whoever, right? But this idea of comprehensive and strategic and not random, not knee-jerk to the situation, but actually breathing, taking a deep breath, charting a course, and actually going on it.
Yeah.
A good example of that, we spoke about the mental health and the counselling that is required, especially the primary school age students. And so we're having some training later on this year with UNICEF, what's called psychosocial training. And this really is going back to what you just said about finding out who's good at this type of work. So it's not going to be for our counsellors at the ministry or education, but this is going to be a mix of community leaders who can go and say, well, okay, when a child's parent is murdered, I can go and intervene and talk to them. So it's not a professional qualification or anything, but it's being able to sit down and say to the child,
it's like a first responder training.
Exactly. Talk to me. Let everything out. And then if there is a need for further treatment, we can refer into our counselling centre, which again falls under the same department as CYDP. But the issue we have there is we don't have enough counsellors. So if we have any counsellors watching, please visit our website. We have 4 or 5 vacancies. I'd love you to start tomorrow.
Now, I want to, before we completely run out of time, let's talk about the surveys that are ongoing. So from what you've explained, you've done focus groups with persons who have come in contact with gangs, who are in gangs, who work with gangs. I'd imagine there's some police department component as well. And then there is a public survey, which means people get to participate and share their views. So I've skimmed through most of it, and it seems that you're trying to collect data not on even interpreting the fears that people have in residing, in pointing out what your top 3 concerns are in your area. Tell us about the type of information people can expect to provide in this survey. I mean, will I be comfortable putting where I live? as a part of the survey?
Yeah, so actually it's a completely anonymous survey.
Okay.
We ask whether you're male or female, we ask for your age group, and then we ask for not your address, but the intersection of the two nearest streets or roads. And we do that not to identify you, but just to make sure we get a good cross-section of the city.
Yeah.
And so we'll never be able to identify you filling in this form. And then the type of information that we're collecting is essentially what you were talking about, you know, your opinions and your thoughts. Are you afraid when you walk down the street? Do you think things are better than they were 12 months ago or 3 months ago? What can you contribute? What would you like to do? Can you lead a basketball or football team? Who do you think should intervene to prevent gang violence, essentially? So, there's some questions which are just a tick box, but some, you have a space to write whatever you want. And I would encourage people to say, put down your feelings.
Yeah. This way it's going to be recorded as a part of your final report. Now, why a separate survey for youth?
You go.
There's lots of reasons. I think you can ask more questions. In fact, there are more questions on the youth survey than the adult survey. And we ask about whether you're likely to join a gang or not. Are your friends members of gangs or likely to join gangs? We ask about whether you're at school and what age you are and what level you are. So there are specific questions that you can target to that age group. And one thing I like about this particular survey is we've expanded the age range that people can respond to. So I thought it was very important that we go all the way down to 12. If we have the age of criminal responsibility at 12, I can charge you with a crime.
Yeah.
The least I can do is ask you for your opinion about crime. So it's from 12 up to 22 is the youth component, and then anyone else is the adult survey.
Now, I want to talk about some of the skepticism that we've seen over the years when it comes to gathering data or understanding issues related to gangs. One is we have a persistently high poverty level. And poverty is real. I mean, it's not just that parents don't want to provide those basic
only
needs.
getting
It's that they
higher and
can't.
higher.
It's not that parents don't want to parent. They just don't know how to parent because they had children as children. And my question is, when we collect this data, I think it's going to be that very hard look in the mirror that we've all been avoiding. What do you perceive to be the benefit of putting numbers and data to this problem that we all know exists?
Well, I think we have to be very focused. This is a gang study, so we're not looking at poverty, even though that is an important
poverty,
aspect.
yeah.
You're right, but we won't be able to say, this is the level of poverty from this particular study. We already know that poverty is an element of criminal activity. We don't even need the study for that.
Yeah.
So this study is looking at how can we design a program to help people join gangs? How can we prevent people going out and killing people on a daily basis? So it's a very focused study. We have a country poverty assessment planned for the end of this year. So that should be able to look at, the broader social protection system, how do we encourage people to have a career? How do we get them to finish school and actually enter employment and become productive members of society? And I think that is the broader data collection and survey that will answer those type of questions.
But to your point, right? We were talking yesterday, and I was asking questions around like industry and and what is the where are the career paths, and just trying to wrap my mind, right? I'm not even from here, right? But to wrap my mind around, if I say no to gangs, I say yes to what, right? And trying to just get that. So I would say maybe two things. The first thing I would say is definitely services need to be, and I'm going to repeat myself, services need to be provided in a way that is strategic and aligned to the populations who are ready to receive them. That will help with one side of it, the equation, right? Like that people are not even getting the services that they need. If they need mental health or trauma, etc., they're not even getting access to that. If they're getting kicked out of school, where are they getting referred to? So there's this service coordination. But then the other part of it is, that's to the people who everybody has a role to play in this, and industry does too, right? So who is going to align themselves with this initiative so that it's not another initiative?
Yeah.
right? Who are in Belize, who are the people who are willing to align themselves to this initiative? And so what I mean by that is, in Pittsburgh, we had this construction, we had a particular group that was doing welding, right? And so someone aligned themselves that I had a pipeline now, right? It was one pipeline, and one pipeline started with another one. But where are the pipelines, and who are the people in that pipeline who are going to willing to align themselves that if we are able to get people the supports and services that they need, if we are able to get them back in school, if we are able to do that, we need somebody on the other side to be able to receive them. And so it's not so that the study does not just become another study. It needs to be this alignment of the system. And I keep saying this over. This is the hardest part. Like this is the hardest part.
Gathering data is easy.
Yeah. But if you gather the data, you align the system. That's only one part. If you gather the data and you get people back on track, kids back on track to graduation, say if that actually gets done, check. There's another part of this equation. And understanding is that's what also they have to do is understanding what are the pipelines. So if you have counselors as a pipeline, school teachers as a pipeline, agriculture as a pipeline, who are the people on the other sides of those pipelines who, if we are able to deliver a good product, which is a healthy young person, if I'm able to deliver them to you, to the pipeline, is there something on the other side for them? And so it is bigger. It is so much bigger if you really want to change this community. It's so much bigger, but the whole focus, I think this is what will be different from any other study. That is the focus. You go into this process with that mindset. See, it's one thing going into the process with collecting data, making a report. It's another thing when you go into this process knowing it's going to be hard, knowing that it's going to be crazy. You have to try to find people to work with and get them to change their mindsets. But you go into it with that intent. That's the difference. You're not going into it with like, let's collect some data. You're going into it to say, this is a systematic change. And for every place that this thing is done, it's hard every single time and challenging every single time. And you will fail and you will succeed, but at least you have a strategy in which you're working towards. That's different.
Now, what about some of the structural issues that we know exist? And it's
The thing-
interesting because we talk to young people, and I always remember Dr. Gale's study when he spoke of the perceptions that communities have of police. And that's only one level. Now we're looking at a judicial system that has a low conviction rate. We have public national issues where children can identify if I am of this class or with this last name, you are less likely to face consequences than me who is an unknown member of this marginalized community. And that perception in itself is one that, I don't even want to say perception, that's a reality that people
That's
see.
a shift in worldview they've developed over the years, considering the trauma they've been through. That's how they can then identify certain things. That's how they were taught to identify. The moment you step into that neighborhood, they can tell whether or not the type of person, you have money. The thing is, I'm going to go back to Errika. Sustainability is our problem. We're going to start something here, and less than a year or two down the road, it crumbles. The pipeline, it's not moving. You send it down, and then it just gets somewhere down the line, there's a clog, it backs up. You start something, everybody ecstatic about it. Sustainability, we're not able to sustain it. And then you end up disappoint these individuals, and you don't want to disappoint them. You don't, because that's it for you. In getting them to trust you again, you're wasting your time.
I think you're right. I look at our ministry sometimes. We cover everything from womb to tomb, and it's very difficult to focus on one particular problem for any amount of time. But I think we're learning from that process. We've been able to carry some big programs. Boost is our flagship program. We've gone through 2 evaluations with good results. We've proven now that we can implement a program over a period of time, effectively, efficiently, and get some good results out of it. So I think it's just to bring that focus to other programs. And we have lots of programs, and they all need that focus. But it's to systematically go through those programs and ensure that they deliver what they should be delivering to the people who need those services at the time.
I
Where is
wouldn't
the
want to-
National Security Ministry in this process?
They're,
Why is-
they're right on board in that
Okay.
technical steering committee. So we have the police department as a member of that committee.
Okay.
And we've met with all of the chiefs. You know, Chester Williams has been one of the focus groups. We did key leader interviews with them. So everybody's been involved in this process.
I wouldn't want to come off as being pessimistic.
Yeah.
It's not my style, but I'm looking at what perhaps is the reality of the situation in Belize. The idea is that we will stage an intervention where we either dissuade the younger generation from joining gangs or assist those who want to come out of the gang life or culture to become productive citizens. But there are those of us in society who have already stigmatized these young men and women. So that even if you're providing them with an alternative and you want for us to buy into that by assisting them once they've come out through the other end of the pipeline, if our collective mentality at this point is, well, you know what? This is a lost generation. I don't want to have anything to do with that. Then it becomes equal part our problem as a society, because then we're not facing the fact that these people are interested in changing their lifestyle or they're changing their lives or what have you. How do you propose to deal with a situation like that where you don't get the buy-in from people who have written them off altogether?
The whole thing is that you're speaking about majority of Belize City, you know, in general, when it comes to them, the stigma. Even the members of the police department, I would say, with the exception of you have people like Mr. Williams, Mr. Broster, Ms. Phillips, they buy into this, what we're trying to do. They understand what we're trying to do. I can't speak for the rest because we've worked hand in hand with these people, and they've been one of our biggest support.
Yeah.
The thing is, you have others who believe that we're wasting our time, that we can declare martial law and then we have the answer to the entire situation, which, as Mark stated earlier, we cannot arrest ourselves out of this. This is not something that we can just go in there and believe that we're going to arrest 300-400 people, send them to prison, but they're not going to stay there forever. They're going to come out. Then what? We're going to do this research, take them to use as a deterrence for them not going into gang or for them to come out. Then what? That's my biggest question. I don't want to be a pessimist either, but what are we going to provide for these individuals? How are we going to provide for them? Because the gang life is their provider. That's how they eat.
Yes.
That's how they manage to have shelter.
So if you
And
take
to
that
look good
away
when they
from
go
them,
in public.
you have to
But
give
if we're
them
going to,
something
exactly,
viable.
we're going to take it away from
Yeah.
them, but then what?
Yeah.
Because the system is so slow. By the time something comes around, that individual is either dead or at prison. Then what? That's always my biggest thing. Then what? Because if we're not willing to provide the necessary resources for these young men and / women, then we're wasting our time in doing all this.
And that's why I keep on asking the question, what information do we get out of this survey that makes any intervention different? Because we've seen the mediation by non-police entities, by police entities, by trained personnel, by not trained personnel, by the willing at heart. We have seen where people have been given, gang members have been given incentives as well. They've been allowed to perhaps continue with drug trade, we only hear. And therefore we see less murders on the streets. We've seen so many different attempts. I think while people, I would imagine the Belizean public is saying, okay, yes, we're trying to understand it, that's great. We're doing something, that's great. But what's gonna be different this time?
Marley, I am not an expert. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am an expert.
But you've been putting in your dues.
But crime is contagious, one. And I've been a part of the mediation team since 2008. And we have been doing mediation a lot, both along with the police element and along with the non-police element. The thing is, not all situation you can just jump up and arrest somebody because you're wasting the court time, your time, and everybody else's time. Mediation does work. As I've mentioned before, sustaining what we start is the problem. We cannot sustain.
Yeah.
So how am I going to tell you to put down the gun, stop selling the drugs? How am I going to provide for you? Because you understand, so we will talk, we will go into mediation, it works, but it will only last for a period of time because eventually they have to go and find something that, thank you for answering my question.
So I'm not an expert, although I play one on TV. No, but what I would say is, this is the one time. Like normally, I like don't like to be an outsider, right?
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like the feeling of it or have that label. But this is the one time like being an outsider is a little bit okay because like someone has to be the push and when you get to your pessimistic side, you know what I mean? To be the push to say, let's try, okay? And so what I would say is that I would want a very, this is gonna be a very, to be successful, it's gonna have to be a very narrow band. And what I mean by that is the success, and I keep saying the word pipeline or whatever, in the beginning needs to be a very narrow band because
Very focused.
yes, in order to build it, it will not serve everybody in the beginning, right? Because you can't, because you don't even have the resources, because the system is fragmented. But a very narrow band, if you could build that and see it, right, and understand that and be very selective about who you're putting on the pipeline, how we're doing it, getting the practice to do it, it's going to be a very narrow band. You can build a very narrow band, narrow, right? Not wide sweeping, that this is going to come
Wipe
in and
out
be
the
the,
problem.
but because this is a systemic, the reason why this is different, which is not meaning that it's going to be successful, right? But the reason why it is different is because it's a systemic approach. And you guys know that your system, why you could be pessimistic, is because you say, okay, you're an outsider, you don't know our systems, right? You know what I mean? If it's built on the system, I could tell you already it's going to fall. But I just would say, build a narrow band with the people who you've already named who buy in, right? So there's a band on the journey of this small track. You do have people at this ministry, right? You do have people who you called out, at least 3, right, in your area who have bought in. You know, so it's like it's aligning all of those people who want something different, who have at least some realm of influence wherever they come from, and you align it. You have to align them in that very narrow band, and you will be able to start to get people through this band. Yeah. And as you build that, then you can figure out how to now replicate it. So all I'm going to say one more thing, and I'll stop because I'm going to repeat myself because that's what I do sometimes. It's aligning the people who give a damn. That's what we're trying to do. Align the people who give a damn and allow them to see how their last little bit of resource can actually link to something else. That's what it's about. That's why I think this is different.
Yeah.
Errika, that's how we've managed over the years to stay afloat with the minority, because it's the minority who would buy in. Just right now, it's the minority.
Yes, but then
because we have a lot of people talking about they want to see X, Y, and Z, but that's all talk.
But it's
that's
a
all.
concern of the majority. So I think that is one of the things. It's building that connector in between. That's what I'm hearing from you. But we're almost out of time. Mark, we got to talk about where people can access the survey. What's your deadline? And when are we going to be seeing the results? Next week?
Well, it's a 2-week process, so it's only will be next week. So you can go to the 2 websites here. We've got humandev.gov.bz/?, and then for youth, it's youth CH5, and for anyone 23 and above, adults CH5.
Okay.
And you can fill in 5-10 minutes. That's all it is.
Okay.
And that's going to be available for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that's in parallel with all of the other data collection after that. So since it's a comprehensive study, it's going to take a little while to come back with results. So I think we're already looking for end of August, maybe even September for the next visit. But again, that will depend on how much information we get back and how quickly they can process it.
Well, thank you for coming in and sharing the work that you have been doing. We really wish you the best of luck, and we hope that people take the opportunity to have their own thoughts and concerns be a part of the study itself. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Frank Tanch, and we're going to be talking about the science of volcanoes. So stay tuned.
When someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Channel 5 introduces the Daily Obituaries. The Daily Obituaries will broadcast all death and funeral announcements and memorials to honor your loved one's life and memories. The Daily Obituaries airs on Channel 5 prior to the evening newscast, with subsequent repeats at 10 p.m. and 12 noon the following day. It will also be placed online on our social media platforms, all for a standard package fee. Celebrate their lives and memories with Channel 5's Daily Obituaries. Honor in life and reverence in death.
And welcome back. And we're moving into our first conversation for today. We're joined by a panel of 3 different representatives. We have with us Mark Antrobus, who is a social planner in the Ministry of Human Development. In the middle, we have Errika Jones, who is a consultant for the Belize Gang Study. And on the end, we have Jeremy McCullough, who is the programs coordinator for CYDP. And we are talking this morning about an ongoing process of gathering data about gangs in Belize. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
We really appreciate you coming in to have this conversation. We know that all the data hasn't been collected as yet, and we're going to be talking about how people can participate in this process. But let's step back to when this study was commissioned and the purpose for it as well.
Okay, so the study has been financed by the Inter-American Development Bank, and this is ongoing work that we've had with them for a number of years. Yeah. So back in 2011, we started with a Community Action for Public Safety project, and that looked at 3 things. That looked at school-based interventions, so we have a positive youth development curriculum. We looked at rehabilitating the social justice system, and we looked at evidence data gathering and dissemination. And you'll remember about a year ago we came on with Belize Info, and that was one of those 3 components. And we had some good success with that. We've got interventions in schools. We do lots of evidence-based assessments now of juveniles in the justice system. We've rehabilitated the youth hostel. There were some very good buildings there now. So we've done lots of work, but of course we still have an issue of gangs and criminal activity on the street. So it's always been an engaging conversation with IDB, and how do we go forward from here? And so we've decided to have sort of a CAPS 2, Community Action for Public Safety version 2. And so at the moment we're doing some technical work to really decide what the design of that program will be.
Okay.
And one of the things that we know we're short of is data on everything really, but specifically crime and violence and why people get into gangs, and more importantly, how can we get people out of gangs if they want to get out? Yeah. And so I know we've had lots of research. So we were just talking about Dr. Gale and his report. We had a seminar only last year at UB where he came and presented again. And so we have some good academic research, ethnographic information, anthropomorphic information, but now we're trying to bring some evidence-based programming from the US and apply it to our context here. Yeah. And that's why we have some consultants come in who are doing a comprehensive assessment of lots of different people.
If you could just explain, what would be the marked difference between what we saw in, for example, the most popular, which is Gale's report, versus this study? What is the difference in terms of the information we're gathering?
So there's lots of complementary information.
Yes.
So, Dr. Gale now is 8 years ago. So, even if we just duplicated his whole report, I think there's value in that because things change very rapidly. Yeah. I think gangs now are more complex, they're certainly more lethal, and resistant to prevention and suppression. So I think it's time to do that research again. But I think we're using a very strong methodology from the US. So there's an agency called the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Yeah. And so they've done this in many cities across the US and have got a good evidence base of what works and what doesn't work. Okay. And that's especially why we have consultants who've done those assessments and can bring that knowledge and experience and say, you know, this is the Belizean context, this works, this won't work. Yeah.
So Errika, that's a great segue into your involvement. Let's talk about what you do back home in the United States and what expertise you're bringing.
Sure. First of all, I work directly for the public school system. I'm the chief of staff for Pittsburgh Public Schools. And then also I work as a consultant for the Department of Juvenile Justice. So we do training across the states, and we also have done the comprehensive gang model in Pittsburgh. So it's not like I'm just a consultant, it's actually somebody who has actually done the process and found the benefits. And one of the main things that I would say, not only just getting the data and the research so that you could actually benchmark, right? Are you making any difference? So that's a very important thing to benchmark so you can see if you're making a difference, but also getting input not just from people who are in policy, but also the people, right? So whether that's community organizations, community people, youth, actually asking them, people who are in gangs, young people, actually asking them why, right? Because a lot of times you can, from a top-down perspective, can sort of try to implement policy, but if you don't really have that missing element of understanding what the people are saying and what they're feeling and what they're thinking, you could actually implement something that is off the mark. The other thing I like about the gang assessment is that it's also tailored to every community. So for example, in LA, they have homeboys industries, right? And that is like very popular and everybody loves that. However, you know, in my area, you know, to implement something from LA into Pittsburgh does not fit and does not work. Even though this is successful, it doesn't necessarily work in Pittsburgh. And so, for example, you know, they have entrepreneurship is one thing. In Pittsburgh, I have to make, because they sell drugs, I have to be able to compete with the drug market and have a career or a job that competes with that money. Yeah. And so one of the things that we did with, you know, construction is a big deal in Pittsburgh. And so we were able to isolate that career path and be able to have young people go into that career path so that they compete with the drug trade. Yeah. So it's an individualized context in which you implement your strategies or your solutions. And the last thing that I'll say, and I could say much more, but the last thing that I'll say is this idea of people working together, right? So what happens is when there's a problem, a lot of people try to attack it all from their context, from their area of strength. What the comprehensive model tries to do is to say, let's look at this together. Let's look at data from across different streams, across different industries, across different, whether that's police to schools, et cetera. Not just look at the data, but actually use it to like sort of do like a 360, you know, view into the problem, not just from one isolated silo, but from a comprehensive approach. And the community and young people are a big part of that mix.
Now, what I find interesting, and I'm sure this had to be a part of the process, is the context will be different in how you gather information in Pittsburgh, LA versus Belize City. Yes. The types of gangs are different. We used to have the replicas of the Crips and Bloods, now it's more of a turf war. And even me saying that is anecdotal. We've only had what seems to be personal experience or exposure to the gang culture, and we've never really known. How do you go about, one, changing the context to fit the country, the cultural context, and also how do you filter out what people think they know about gangs and really know about gangs?
This part is the best part, right? Because doing it anecdotally is what people do. Something big happens and we need to do something, right? Some big event happens, it gets media attention, and we're going to do something about it. Well, that's like ready, fire, you're right, and then later on you might aim, right? What the comprehensive model says, you know, you not to resist that, because you do have to, you know, definitely address violence, but to actually sort of assess it and understand what is driving the gangs in this area. Who are they? What crimes do they commit? What is their motivation? And you only can do that by actually not only just looking at crime and police data, actually analyzing the police data, But then also, I mean, like, and when I say analyze the police data, I mean like reading reports even, right? But then also talking to the people. So, you know, I don't know if I'm, you know, going ahead, but, you know, we're going to go, we've already done, they've already done focus groups, but today this week rather, we're going to talk to young people in different settings. We're even going to the prison to talk to individuals who have been arrested for such crimes, right? To try to understand, not just from reading the paper or watching television, but actually asking the people who did it and why.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, when you receive information from the police department in respect of gangs and the motivation behind some of the crimes that are being committed, they've always said, okay, well, in Belize City, the turf wars and the gang violence is attributed to the sale of marijuana, for instance. But that doesn't come with specific statistics or it's not grounded in some form of evidence that says, look, in this particular area, this is what the gangs thrive on. It's just, you know, word of mouth, so to speak.
It's an assumption.
But you have to remember this, you know, this is an illegal activity. So your normal data collection methodology just won't work. You know, I can't go and ask you how much money do you make from selling illegal drugs. You know, it simply does not work. So I think a lot of it does have to be anecdotal. I think CYDP, who work with this particular population on a daily, nightly basis, have an awful lot of data, information, and they know what's going on. I think they know more than perhaps any other agency of what's going on. I think the advantage of this comprehensive assessment is that first word, comprehensive. We don't engage the public, the community leaders, and the youth as much as we should do on lots of different topics. And I think this is a great opportunity to have that huge, wide, broad consensus. I think this is the first time, for example, our ministry will have an online survey where people can give their opinion.
Any person can participate.
So at the moment, we're doing it solely for Belize District.
Yeah.
Because we have to focus where the biggest problem is.
Yes.
But we have plans to take it out to different districts later on.
And there's a youth survey and an adult survey online.
Exactly. And so just to go back a step, you're right, we've done interviews with gang members, we've done it with school personnel, principals and teachers. This week we're doing the focus groups. All of our clients who will go to CURD this week will fill in the survey as well. So complementary to the focus groups. We also talked about working in partnership. And so one of the things we did before this study is we brought on our partners. So Restore, Department of Youth Services, the police department, they all form a technical group that overseeing this project. And we were very fortunate to bring UNICEF in, because a lot of the work that we're doing this week, they've actually funded. So it's a good partnership, I think.
Let me bring the conversation over to Jeremy for a second. Having, as a program coordinator for CYDP, and you are actually a police officer as well, a corporal, you have one-on-one interactions with whether it's a child who comes in conflict with the law or a young adult. How much self-awareness do they have in understanding their own motivations as to why? Because if I'm to reflect on my teenage years, sometimes you just did things because you did it, and I really didn't understand why. And I know it's a youth development issue, but how much do you find that they understand what their motivations are in being involved and first getting initially involved in this type of illegal activity?
One of the things you're looking at is that we're working with two different generations.
Okay.
We have the older heads and we have the younger ones. The older heads may have a more clear idea of why they're doing certain things, etc. But then when we're looking at the south side of Belize, and I don't like to categorize when it comes to Belize and divisions, but the marginalized area, where you find that majority of these young people that we're working with suffer from more than one adverse childhood experience. So the majority of them would suffer from complex trauma. And they themselves don't know why. That's the whole thing. Self-awareness, no. Majority of them are heading into that brick wall, self-destruction. And the thing is, it is so sad that you'll find out that majority are, you know, primary school dropout. I'm not even going to reach high school, because that's the tragedy. You'll find out that you know, you on a daily basis, their basic needs are not even being met. You'll find them walking down the street, maybe contemplating what they're going to do for the rest of the day. Whether it is good or bad, majority of the time it's something down the line of committing themselves. So it's to have a more clear understanding how we can better reach out to these individuals. Over the years, I've been there since 2008. My entire career as a police officer has been at CYDP. So I've witnessed too much to speak of, and yes, data is there, but it's not clear. However, as we can make it more clear, then the better we can understand how best we can be effective.
Now, with your direct involvement, and obviously you hear all the conversations that take place in the public realm, what do you think we're missing the most about understanding this particular population?
The thing is, majority of these policymakers are just policymakers. They're up there and not down there doing the work. So they react to situation, as Errika said. Something happened, we're going to make something of it. We do not take proactive measures. That's our problem. We do not understand what's going on down there. I believe they are afraid to get in the mud with the pig. That's how I would classify it.
Will this serve to bridge that gap, so to speak?
I'm hoping it serves to bridge that gap, or else it's just going to be another research, another consultant. That's all it's going to be.
So actually the output of this particular consultancy is the design of a gang intervention program. So it's not just collecting data for collecting data's sake. There is a designated output. And I already know that we're looking at different types of models that could work. I've spoken to Michelle, the lead consultant, and I think she's on a good path to advise us. So I think well before the year's out, we will start to implement this new program.
And I'm hoping that, you know, through the focus groups, we could also put like a personal face to it and not just a data face to it, right? So, you know, like I was just last night just reading through some of the raw comments and just, you know, already like to your point, like the heartstring just by listening to what people are saying in their personal stories. You know, and so we want to, you know, not just have just data, but also put it in the context of real people every day. So that young person who, you know, is finding themselves marginalized, finding themselves just walking down the street, trying to figure out, you know, right or wrong, who may not understand why they're doing what they're doing, but to understand, like, do you want a better life? Because sometimes people think that gang members and people who commit crime are just hardcore hardened and you just have to throw the book at them. But this idea of trying to understand, is there a population within that population who really is just, right, just like crying out for something and they're not throwaway, right? They're not throwaway.
That's the problem because in the classroom, they suffer from, you know, a whole different layer upon layer of trauma. And, you know, crying out for help. They act out in the classroom because these are kids. But then the teachers, they cannot recognize the symptoms of a child that is suffering from PTSD or other sort of trauma. And they kick them out. But when you kick out a child from out of that classroom, what happens? You give him a gun or you send him to jail. And that's our problem.
Well,
we do not have trained professionals to deal with
And I was hoping it'd be our second segment, but since we're here, you know, we had a conversation with Restore Belize about a month ago about their work with gang interventions. And one of the things that struck me, I mean, really struck me, was talking about children who haven't even reached teenage years yet, having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, at the level of, you know, someone who's been at war. Children who've been exposed to multiple forms of trauma, from abuse to exposure to gang violence, to major loss, to lack of parents, to not having adequate food to not being successful in school.
You just described the entire south side of Belize today.
And you know, when we hear that story, I mean, I feel like I can choke up just going further into it. But then, when I put that particular story into the person who indiscriminately shoots at a house and kills an innocent child or an innocent bystander, I no longer want to connect to that story. And my question to you is, how important is the empathy? Because no matter what data you put out, when you take public resources and you say these people who've killed innocent people, other gang members, who criminals, will now be given additional resources for X, Y, Z. It's hard for that public empathy to be there.
So what we would do is you have to break it down, right? So there's primary prevention, there's intervention, and then there's suppression, right? And so now it's a conversation that clearly says, if you do X, Y, Z, right? There are people who traumatize communities, and they need to be locked up, right? I mean, we're not empathizing with necessarily with people who are killing people because they continue to cycle. However, what we are doing is disaggregating, right, the data and disaggregating, I'm just gonna say this, I don't mean this in a negative way, the people, right? To say there's a whole continuum in which a person goes from being a child of trauma to being a hardcore killer. There is a continuum. And so now let's look at that continuum and break it out and figure out how for this group, we're gonna really hit them with this type of programming, etc. For this group, it looks like this. And for this group, they do have to be incarcerated because of what they've done. But when you actually open up the continuum, it allows for more intervention. When you actually talk about you talk about research-based programming for each group, you now have an opportunity to save, not to be savior or say anything like that, but to actually to work with, to intervene, to try to change the lives of people who are young people who are on this continuum. So that's what I would say, because you have to, and we have a neighborhood, I mean, it's Homewood, East End of Pittsburgh, right? So you have, that population who's like really traumatized, but then the community doesn't want to. That's why I'm so happy we have this survey and we have an opportunity to talk about this, because sometimes as a community members, they don't want young people to enter into the criminal system because of whatever reasons there. Maybe, if they, get identified, they never get out, right? So now when the conversation is not only about criminalization or hopelessness, right? Now you can have a conversation and the community can feel like maybe I'll take a chance to get involved because now you've opened and broadened up the conversation, not to just these two pieces. Hopelessness, where I feel like, what do we even do? Because I don't even know how. And then criminalization, where it's like a whole group of the community who continues to be caught up in this cycle. So that's what I would say.
And I think we know, and lots of communities have found this in the US, that you can't arrest your way out of this particular situation. And that exact continuum of where people are, we need to have a continuum of services and programs that deal with people wherever they are. And I think that's what we call the social protection system. And we have a fragmented system right now. We've done lots of work in the last couple of years. We did a big review about 18 months ago. So we have conditional cash transfer programs now. We have roving caregivers who start from zero, trying to develop children, because that's a critical age. So it's putting all of those pieces together. And something that I always joke now with my colleagues, so we have this term wraparound services. And I wish I had $1 now for every time that cropped up in conversation, because it's like a huge new approach. Where we say we're not just going to intervene and give you, say, $300 to go to secondary school, because you need more than that. You need counselling, you need guidance, you need extra resources. So when we intervene holistically and say, what else do you need to develop? And I think that's a fundamental change that we've made philosophically. I don't think we've quite implemented it to any great degree now, but we're certainly on the right path.
The thing is,
let's just stick a pin here for a second, because it's getting very interesting. We don't want to keep on going. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue with our conversation of the ongoing gang study in Belize City, and we'll definitely find out how you can participate as well. So stay tuned.